Hello, dear friends. My name is Vasyl Pekhno. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and I invite all of you to watch this latest update on Ukrainian battle map situation as of August the 13th. So please like it. This video. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave your comments below. I will start with Pokrovsk region, where yesterday appeared quite dangerous situation with some Russian offensive actions, really dangerous offensive actions, just deep inside to Dobropillia city. But as for today, I can say that those situations are being occupied. So Ukrainian forces doing their best not to let the situation to really catastrophical one. So let's make this overview. Let's start. Let's begin.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Let's begin our review of the situation at the front. I'll start right away with Dobropillia. What's happening here right now? First of all, yesterday it became known that the First Corps of the National Guard, Azov, obviously with Azov as part of it, has recently started carrying out its duties here. It's worth mentioning that one of the brigades within this corps is the 14th Brigade, if I'm not mistaken, the Rapid Response Brigade Chervona Kalina. They were diligently carrying out their assigned tasks here in the area of Rodnenske, though geographically located somewhat further to the south. Overall, the current situation in Dobropillia right now is such that unfortunately we are once again facing a significant organizational problem. In essence, a rather disparate and fragmented patchwork of various units has formed here, creating a complex and challenging scenario. Accordingly, when I talk about how the situation in Dobropillia is unfolding, I will do so without unnecessarily stirring up panic, because first of all, it's important to say that all the commotion yesterday, all the noise that arose last week, for which I sincerely thank even the deep state analysts, was justified. It was justified because the Russian advances in the Dobropillia direction did not happen in a single day or in just a few hours. Obviously, the situation was kept quiet for some time because the enemy doesn't just appear out of thin air, and such breakthroughs don't happen in a single instant. There is a certain amount of preparatory shelling, a buildup of enemy personnel, and a checking of the routes along which this enemy force could move, relocate, and take up positions. As of now, we can say that the command has a complete picture, even if there were some attempts to keep things quiet. And I tend to believe that there were indeed attempts to conceal information, and there was a certain amount of dishonesty about the real situation at these positions. So the command found out about these issues and responded accordingly. Just yesterday, there were, well, things I shouldn't really talk about, but a number of responses took place before the situation became critical. And it's very important that this was brought to light in the public sphere. In particular, I believe that Deep State did a great and important job. Because yes, yesterday, official spokespersons, particularly regarding the Pokrovsk direction, tried to convince everyone that these were absolutely insignificant enemy advances. Just 5 or 10 people moved, took up positions somewhere, including in Chasiv Yar or in Vesele or in Zoloty Kolodias. But let's be honest and straightforward. We're not talking about 5 or 10 people. And at the same time, it's not about hundreds either, as some have also tried to claim. In reality, we're talking about several dozen people because, for example, in Vesele, the farthest settlement to the right and at the top, up to 24 enemy personnel were recorded. Right now, appropriate actions are being taken against them. Now, as of yesterday, there have already been reports that some of the occupiers are even being taken prisoner by our soldiers. Well, in fact, the most important thing that has happened here is that competent commanders have taken charge, and now all local Russian breakthroughs will be eliminated. This is not, thank God, a strategic collapse of the front, at least not yet. But if it isn't dealt with, it could lead to very serious problems. It's still too early to talk about eliminating it because the Russians clearly understand that they've created this local breach and they're going to keep pushing more and more of their resources into it. That's why I'm not rushing ahead or jumping to conclusions, but I'm saying that we still need to wait, at least for now, to understand how and where this situation will develop further, both here and around Dobropillia, as well as with these local breakthroughs that have formed here. So for now, at least there is an understanding, which the General Staff finally acknowledged yesterday afternoon, and the President also mentioned in his evening address that there were confirmations of this Russian breakthrough, with them advancing 10 kilometers into the rear. At the same time, the President said that the Russians were advancing without equipment, I can also, of course, confirm this information. In other words, there wasn't any there. And the main logic of the Russians lies in the following. They want to get in with infantry, secure their positions, then allow these infantry groups to grow, in other words, to accumulate more reserves so they can start attacking the next villages, while in the previous ones, it's not so much equipment that moves in, but rather UAV operators who then simply start terrorizing the area. And this was their main objective. So far, it is understood that neither technical support nor UAV operators have reached those groups of Russians who broke through to these settlements, which are visualized on the deep state map. None of this has happened yet. Zelensky says that it was Russia that pushed to create a certain informational backdrop by August 15th, especially in the American sphere, ahead of the negotiations in Alaska, to make it seem as if Russia is advancing and Ukraine is losing territory. Personally, I don't quite share this position because the advances the enemy made here, the way they pushed forward, what they did, there has long been information about such things, about similar concentrations, about the tactics the occupiers use here, and those local breakthroughs they were aiming for. In my opinion, they achieved them here regardless of the 15th. It just so happened that everything coincided in time. Wherever they get the opportunity, wherever the Russians can, that's where they push forward. Where they can infiltrate, that's where they infiltrate. This can happen for absolutely any reason. Gaps between units, an unsuccessful rotation, reports of false circumstances, not, an insufficient number of infantry, not enough concentration of our UAV operators, not enough attention on our part to those kill zones that should be created for Russian logistics routes elsewhere in Donbass. All of this can at some point become the reason for such a breach, which the Russians break through and then try to exploit to the fullest. Right now, near Dobropillia and under Dobropillia, I hope that, for now, this is a solvable situation and stabilizing the problem is possible. But let's not get ahead of ourselves because, in fact, we've previously had situations where similar local Russian breakthroughs have occurred. I'll just remind you at least that in the fall, I think it was 2024, on the left bank of the Oskil River, there was such a breakthrough, remember, from the direction of from Sinkivka towards Kupiansk. That was in the fall of 2024. Back then, in November, they broke through and some armored vehicles even appeared within the city limits. And then, very quickly, this entire salient was, eliminated and essentially cancelled. Yes, its existence was ended. Similar breakthroughs happened at one time from Toretsk in the direction of Katerinivka, actually. This was already at the beginning of this year, in the spring. In April 2025, assault groups from near Toretsk were heading this way toward Katerinivka and Kostiantinivka. So all of this has already happened. Similar breakthroughs were eliminated. This breakthrough has a somewhat different origin because right now the Russians are definitely reinforcing the Pokrovsk direction, and according to the general staff, they have deployed 110,000 troops here. But I think there is hope, let's say, that it can be eliminated. The main thing is that attention is drawn to it in time. And for this, first and foremost, I thank those who took part in making this public, not to spread panic among Ukrainians, but in order to stop false reports from the bottom up in a timely manner. In addition, it is worth mentioning that yesterday Zelensky acknowledged not only this Russian breakthrough in the Pokrovsk direction, but also that right now the Russians are actually redirecting their combat-ready reserves from the Sumy direction to 3 other directions. Specifically, the president says these are being sent to Pokrovsk, to the Novopavlivka direction, and also to Zaporizhzhia. The occupiers are directing their resources there as well. As for how they are distributing them, the president says, right now in the Sumy region, in this northern direction, there are about 53,000 Russian servicemen. At least 30,000 of them will be redeployed to our eastern fronts. So 30,000 will be moved and 23,000 will remain. The largest number of troops is to be redirected to the Zaporizhzhia front. 15,000 personnel are moving there. Second is the Pokrovsk direction with an additional 7,000. And third is the Novopavlivka direction, where up to 5,000 more may be redeployed. So it turns out that almost roughly 27,000 Russians could very likely be redeployed in the near future. Regarding all the escalations that are likely in the Zaporizhzhia direction, as you can see, the priority here is that the Russians intend to redeploy 15,000 troops from the Kursk and Sumy regions. So regarding that priority, I talked about it in quite some detail in yesterday's review of the battle map for August 12th, about the fact that in reality the Zaporizhzhia region is in the enemy's focus, and there are movements of equipment in the south, in Berdyansk and Mariupol, quite massive ones, some of the largest movements of equipment. This was reported by our resistance movement in the south. And undoubtedly in Zaporizhzhia, the enemy may be preparing serious offensives. However, besides Zaporizhia, I would also, of course, highlight the Kherson direction, which in turn, and I want to emphasize this here, in my opinion, is a diversionary maneuver in the south, because it is precisely through the Kherson region that the enemy is trying to stretch our forces so that there isn't enough attention given to the Zaporizhia front. Yes, right now there are these kinds of fire duels happening here, not only artillery duels, but primarily drone duels. In the area of Kherson and Oleshki, the Russians are still focusing on the Ostriv neighborhood, which they keep shelling, and they are trying to disrupt our logistics, dropping guided aerial bombs, CABs. In turn, we are taking out radar stations, destroying anti-aircraft missile systems in Crimea, striking various command posts, and targeting operator positions. Well, for example, yesterday's story comes from Special Operations Forces operators who were in the settlement of Abrikosivka in Crimea. By the way, we actually have two places called Abrikosivka. This one is located on the western coast of Crimea near Yevpatoria. So here in Abrikosivka, the Special Operations Forces reported that they destroyed a rather interesting enemy radar station. This particular radar station is officially transliterated as TRLK-10. This specific TRLK designation actually stands for the Scala M track radar system. This track radar, which is a crucial piece of equipment, is of undeniable Soviet origin and was developed during that period. It's a complex radar system that includes, I'll use some rather technical terms here, both primary and secondary capabilities for detecting aerial targets. In short, this system is designed for total control of air traffic in the sky, particularly because this radar station is a crucial component of the air traffic control system as a whole. The range of this radar is 350 kilometers. So from here, from Abrikosivka, you can count out 350 kilometers. That is, it is used not only to track and detect aerial targets attacking the Crimean Peninsula, but also, for example, to track aircraft attacking the same coastline on the right bank of Kherson region. And so the escort of Russian aviation will be weakened as a result of the destruction of this radar station. This means that the occupiers will now be less able to terrorize Kherson. And let's also add the information from last week when the Security Service of Ukraine struck 5 enemy aircraft in Saki. And there is a general trend of disabling the enemy's aviation capabilities in the Kherson direction. But overall, in my opinion, Kherson will not be the enemy's main target. Rather, it will be the Zaporizhia region during the upcoming operations after August 15th. This is, after all, what the president is talking about, that the Russians are now trying to establish, you could say, footholds for further activity after negotiations with Trump. Supposedly, Putin's troops will be putting more pressure in Zaporizhia, and of course, they will also be stepping up their pressure in the Novopavlivka and Pokrovsk directions. So, let's return to Pokrovsk. Let's imagine, friends, that this breakthrough will be eliminated, which, as I said, there is a chance for, and the Russians will return to their original positions where they were in Novoshakove, Suvorove, Novotoretsk, and Nikanorivka. There is still a problem. The problem is that after the breakthrough towards Dobropillia, we haven't talked about the fact that in reality, the occupier, because as you can see, there have been further advances here, has actually already reached the outskirts, the eastern outskirts of Rodinske. And Rodinske, let me remind you, it's a critically important key settlement for the defense and logistical support of Mirnohrad and to the southwest of Pokrovsk. The crucial thing is all those publicly available open source intelligence data that allow us to precisely track events at the front also let us definitively conclude that the Russian occupiers are already present on the eastern outskirts of Rodinske. This is clearly confirmed, for example, by this compelling video footage from the 16th Artillery Brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine, where, as you can distinctly see, they are actively operating their formidable Bodana artillery systems. By the way, these are the impressive towed Bodana howitzers, and they are precisely firing at the eastern outskirts of the settlement of Rodinsky. Actually, based on this video, OSINT analysts, there's a community like that on the Telegram channel, in fact, a really great channel. I recommend everyone subscribe to it. They were able to verify that this is indeed Rodinske, specifically the central eastern areas of this settlement. So, in fact, unfortunately, we can say that the Russians have entered the eastern parts of Rodinske. And here, we must not forget about this threat either, nor ignore it, because while we can still fix things in Dobropillia, it will be much more difficult with Rodinske. The concentration of UAV operators in this mining town will, in fact, create irreparable problems for our logistics throughout the entire Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad agglomeration. Let me remind you that a highway runs through Rodinske, connecting Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad with Dobropillia. In addition, it's important to understand that the second highway goes through Hrishin. Here, this is how the second highway runs. The third one we have is from Pokrovsk to Pavlohrad, which, as you can imagine, is also being targeted by enemy operators. So, In actual fact, we will be left with almost only one viable route through Kherson, particularly if the Russians manage to effectively cut through Rodinske, thereby isolating other paths. So the lifeline road will more or less remain through Kherson, which is still passable. That's why we shouldn't ignore these threats and focus only on what's happening in Dobropillia and around Dobropillia. Today, I also wanted to say a few important words about Chasiv Yar, because regarding Chasiv Yar, there is such a Western observer, Play Fra. He, by the way, was actually one of the first individuals to note the significant advance and the considerable threats it poses near Dobropillia. Well, here again, regarding the situation near Dobropillia, we have somewhat lost track of the situation unfolding north of Chasiv Yar in the area of the settlement of Maiske. Here you can see this is exactly the enemy's advance. Or I can even show it like this on the deep state map shaded in. Why is this advance dangerous? The thing is, during the enemy's entire movement here, some rather important fortifications were captured, which belong to the first line of defense beyond Chasiv Yar. That is, beyond Chasiv Yar, there is a ridge of such defensive positions. And it will be easier to see on this map. You can see here these little white squares, these mark our positions, where in fact our defensive lines were located, where our infantry was stationed. These positions were, these fortifications were equipped with several lines of barbed wire. They had camouflage-covered systems of trenches, passageways, dugouts, and bunkers in the forest belts, which made them quite good fortifications. But unfortunately, it can now be stated that the Russians have captured them. That is, the general trend of the situation worsening is noticeable everywhere, not only in Chasiv Yar, but let's not forget about the Siversky direction, where in the Serebryansky forestry, events have already occurred involving the enemy's advances. And this means that the enemy is now putting pressure on Serebryanka. From Serebryanka, accordingly, the same pressure will be exerted on Siversk. That's why the war is truly at the key stage right now, at its climax. And support for the defense forces is needed from each of us now, friends, more than ever. So, if I need to highlight information that's important to announce, I'll do it. If it's necessary to, well, not so much calm things down, but to look at the situation realistically, I'll do that too. Now, a realistic view of the situation in Dobropillia, the front has not been breached. Measures are being taken. Unfortunately, we missed certain things regarding Dobropillia, but there is hope that it's not too late yet. However, that's not certain. Let's wait at least another day for a more thoughtful understanding of the situation. Well, I'll end it here. Thank you for your attention. Take care of yourselves. All the best, and until we meet again.